Welcome pilots to this awesome build video of the Vickers Valiant. I'll be using twin 64 FMS running on 4S with 50 amp ESCs I think, some 15 minute and 30 minute epoxy and micro balloons mixed through it, some Yoo-hoo pour and the odd spot of hot glue here and there. So the first step will be using the 1x6mm carbon strips and inserting them into the horizontal sole. So as you can see here, we're just trimming out the wee bit of foam that's cut in the middle. Parts of this video, I won't be going by the build guide itself due to the size of it. I was doing a lot on the wing surface itself before I moved on to the fuselage, well, before I moved on to attaching it to the fuselage, just due to the size and making sure that I can actually move it about the build table. So we've taped off the underside, mixed up some 30-minute epoxy, and we'll just tape the top as well just to make sure it's nice and clean, and carefully feeding in some epoxy into the groove there for the carbon strips. Just smoothing it out to the edges. And then with a scrap piece of foam, just tidying up any spare epoxy that's on the top there. And then we'll do the same on the other side. I've just got a couple of batteries I'm putting on it just to make sure I keep it nice and flat and flush. Like I say, a wee bit of epoxy, and just like we did on the first strip, just tease it into the groove there, and making sure you make it's against the sides all the way along it. Then remove the tape and just let that set. So next step, I'm moving on to the aft fuselage spine. So here we've got the two parts, mirror cuts, and I've just cut a groove, just an angled groove for the 6mm carbon spar that's going to support the tail. And as you can see, I'm just using the edge just to roll it along, make sure there's a nice space, and I'm not, trying to cut through the foam so that it comes through the other side. Using a good amount of Yoo-hoo pour here just to make sure it's nice and stuck, and then mixing in some, here I've got some 15-minute epoxy just into the groove where we've pressed in the carbon spar, and then with a scrap piece of foam just spreading out the glue so it's kind of even. Put in the carbon tube and allow it to set. I've just got a couple of weights just on the end there where the carbon spar is. Slide that off to the side, remove the tape on the first part now that the epoxy's set, and all the pre-marked and scored sections on the panel, just remove the tape. And on the front here, again, we've got the two pieces, mirrored parts, small amount of Yoo-hoo pour, and just spread it about so it's nice and thin application, not too much. Lay them back together and just let it set, let it cure. So there's the tail piece is ready, the nose part's ready, and the belly part as well. And just test fitting, sliding it in to see how far along the slot goes. So at this point, I'm using the aft horizontal sole, putting that in just so that when I slide in the belly part, the sole itself, I'm not going to go too far back. So I'm using this as just the guide here. Small amount of glue in the tabs and put that into place. Mixing up just a tiny wee bit of epoxy just for the edge so that when I meet the two parts together it'll stick. A wee bit Yoo-hoo pour along the contact surfaces where I'm going to slide the panel in. Just tease it along and make sure it meets up with the aft spine itself. Now that that's on, I know that that's the right length, so we're going to use a wee bit of epoxy again and some Yoo-hoo porn slide in the opposite side. That way we've got a nice even meat all the way along. I'm just using a wee bit of tape just to tack them into place, just to make sure it's nice and flat and flush. So the next part here, the forward fuselage spine that we've already laminated together. Now that the back's kinda set off, using again some Yoo-hoo pour, slide it into place. And then there's a wee bit that I forgot, I just put along the front. And then using the locating tab at the back there, slide that into place, and it looks stunning already. And the next step should be moving on to the bulkheads 1 through to 5. So here's bulkhead 1, small amount of glue. I've already test fitted it. Slide that into place, make sure it's nice and tight against the belly panel. Sole, I think it's actually called, proper name. And then bulkhead 2 and 3 here. So just on the tabs and the contact surfaces. Again, I had a wee test fit, slid this into place. Modeling pin, tack it into place, and then bulkhead number 2. Small amount of glue on the contact surfaces again. Slide into position and just try and make sure it's as even as possible to each side. And again, small modeling pin, just tacking it. Holding it in place there. So the next step is bulkhead 4. Sorry, bulkhead 3, the underside. Again, small amount of glue on the contact surfaces there. Just smudge it about. And push that in, and make sure the 2 tabs on the outside slot into the fuselage sole itself. And then bulkhead number 2 on the underside as well. Again, slide that into position. Just make sure it's nice and level. And here I was just trying to put them together so they were even. For bulkhead 2 it was nice and even. And bulkhead 4 and 5, so now that they're set, with bulkhead 4, as they're only corner pieces, I found out later on in the build when I was getting to skinning it, you can see here I'm just test fitting it. Ideally, I think it would be helpful if you used a corner piece, 90-degree angles, just to make sure it's nice and true, so that when it comes to skinning the model with the 3mm sheets of foam later on, you don't actually miss the formers here where it's due to butt up against. So a small amount of glue on bulkhead 4 and 5. I've put 5 into place, and I'm just test fitting the retract sides. Quite happy that that was there, so slide ebb into position as well just now. And again, this way, for me, it was keeping it nice and flush and straight. Quite simple. And like I say, it's just trying to make sure it's nice and straight as possible. So bulkhead 6 here, and the bomb bay sides. So here we're just moving it about in the table. Bulkhead 6 here at the back. The top part, oh sorry, this is the underside. Small amount of glue and just tack into place. Wiping away any of the excess glue and using it on the other part as well. Turn it over and we'll do the top now. So just on the locating tabs, small amount of glue, slide into position, and then I actually forgot a wee bit on the inside. Again, just wiping away any of the excess glue. So here's the bomb bay sides, mirrored parts. Again, just lining them up, trying to get everything as straight and true to each piece as possible while the glue is still wet, and then I can sort of move it about and make sure it's fine. Again, some glue in the contact surfaces and slide into place. And as you can see, the larger parts at the front of the fuselage as it tapers off to the rear of the bomb bay. Just using a wee bit of tape just to hold into place while the glue cures. And quite happy with how it's all looking so far. So then there's the wee spines along the fuselage itself. Again, just tiny amount of glue in the contact surfaces and the spine itself, and just work your way along. Very simple. And then do the same on the opposite side as well. Just small amounts in the tabs, the wheel locator, holding in a wee bit in the spine itself, the sole, the aft sole. So here we should be moving on to the forward fuselage bay, but what I'm doing is I'll do the bomb bay sides, just square them off, put them in, because like I say, I've not putting on the wing piece itself just now. So what I want to do is make sure it's all ready with the formers and things before I move on to actually putting the big piece in, and that being the wing. So here, tiny amount of glue on one side, offer them up to each other and smudge it about, so it's a very, very thin application of glue, and just work along the bomb bay sides. Nice big bomb bay there. So here's the rear servos. I've actually had to put these into separate channels because as a Y connector, because they're both in the same orientation, a Y connector won't run them. So I've got a tiny wee cut slot in the tail itself just to feed the wires through. A wee bit of Yoo-hoo pour on each servo and slide them into position. I've already squared these up, hooked them into the receiver, made sure they were nice and straight, centered. And then the wee spare piece of foam that I cut out to get the strip for the servo wires, shaved a wee bit off it, and again we're just using a small amount of Yoo-hoo pour and tack that into place just to hide the wires as best as possible. We'll give it a wee sand later just to make sure it's nice and flush. So like I say, pilots, parts of this video's not in line with how the build guide goes, but again I'm just making it easy for the size of the build table that I have. So just running some extension cables through, a wee bit of hot glue in each side, just because when these are in place we won't have any access to them when the fuselage is skinned, and obviously we want to make sure we don't lose any connection. So the next step in the guide is the wing and getting the wing put together. So here we've got the two halves, mirror pairs, just lining them up on the table and using a wee bit of tape to tack them into place, make sure they're nice and flush with each other. Then what I'm doing here, using a wee bit of glue just along the seam to put them together and smudging it about. If I was to do it again, I'd probably use epoxy because it didn't adhere too well. So onto the main wing spar itself, taped up the underside, and we're just cutting out the wee bits, the inserts of the foam. As you can see, it wasn't cut right through, and use low tack masking tape. It's kind of key to this. So here I'm using 30-minute epoxy and micro balloons itself. Give it a good mix and insert it into the space where you're going to put in the main spar itself for the wing. Now I've quite happily poured it along. When I say pour, epoxy will thicken up when you use micro balloons. And what I'm doing here is I'm just using the end of the rod to actually tease it out to the outsides of the wing itself, which actually worked not too bad. And then insert the carbon spar also, just push it into place, and again using a couple of weights just to hold it down, make sure it's nice and flush. And then carefully remove the low tack masking tape. It's quite happy with the finish. There was only a wee spot in the middle there that wasn't flushed out to the side with epoxy. So the next step is attach it to the fuselage, which I'm not. Also, what I did do was forget to put a wee bit of fiberglass cloth along the edges here. So what I've done, I've taped up the underside just so the glue's not getting on the table, and then using some epoxy along the edges so there was glue there already, and then offer up the carbon tube, and then using the tape to keep it nice and pressed against the wing while the glue cures, and do the same with the opposite side as well. A wee bit of tape on it, mix up some epoxy. Here, 15-minute epoxy I'm using, and again just smudge it against the edge of the wing onto the tape, put the carbon rod in, and then using the tape to fold it over and keep it nice and flush against the wing. Then we should be looking at the battery bay sides and the wing ribs, but what I'm doing is I'm just moving on to the wing ribs itself, starting out at the end here and working my way inside, because like I say, I think for the build table it was easier for me to do it this way, keep it nice and flush and flat against the table rather than on the fuselage itself. Here I actually forgot to cut out one of the locating tabs on the wing plate itself. As you can see, I just removed one of the small tabs. So all the way along one side of the wing, with all the wing formers, the ribs, and then do the same on the opposite side. There will be parts of this video that may not be in full shot, obviously, for the size of the model that it is, and doing the same on the opposite side. I was a wee bit confused with the formers there, I wasn't sure what was on what. Small amounts of glue in the contact surfaces. And I've not actually trimmed the corners off these as yet either. So here we've got the aileron reinforcer. Lining it up just to make sure I'm quite happy with it, so it's nice and flush, and then just trimming away the corners so that when I put it into place it'll be nice and tight fit. I did it this way because sometimes I get overzealous with a sharp blade and either cut away too much or sometimes not enough. So again, small amount of glue in the contact surface on the ribs itself as well. Give it a wee chance to air dry a bit and then slide into position. And then we're doing the same on the opposite side. I've actually got the 3mm ply parts already cut out. I was going to get them laser cut, but I figured no, I would just try them myself, and I was quite happy with how they turned out. Fair impressed with myself. So once the other aileron reinforcers in place, moving on to the flap reinforcer as well. Again, some glue along the contact surfaces. I've trimmed small amounts, angles off it, so it's nice and flush. And then the same with the opposite side as well. And just trimming off the wee bit so it's nice and straight. So we should be moving on to the undercarriage here. This was challenging, very interesting with Craig's design. I was really looking forward to giving it a go. As you know, I don't really have a decent runway at the flying field, and this is the first I've actually installed landing gear on. So the back parts there, just a small amount of glue in the contact surfaces and lining it up with the carbon fibre spar, the main spar that goes through the wing. Here I'm just having a look, test fitting. I've got a wee scrap piece of foam and figuring out where the supporting spar across the top's going to go. So here we've got the Retract reinforcer part at the back that's not glued in, and then I'm test fitting the 3mm ply parts as well, just so that I can make sure I'm happy with how everything's cut out, how it's going to slot together, and to be honest, just trying to figure it out how it's all going to go together so that I'm happy, and I'm certainly not making any big major mistakes. And as you can see there, I forgot to cut out the wee centre pieces. So once they're cut out, I used the 3mm parts and just test fitted them all together and make sure I'm happy with it, to see that, you know, they all slot in nice and easily and I'm not having to force them into place. And then the forward retract support, having that sitting there as well. So once I've kind of test fitted them about, it was time to get to gluing them into position. So I've got a couple of wee clamps here, and obviously the retract mechanism as well, just making sure that when I glue it, I'm gluing it into the right place and there's enough space for the retract mechanism to go in as well. So here we've got some Yoo-hoo pour along the contact surfaces, keeping the support pieces in place and having it all lined up with each part together so that, you know, we're in the right location. And then using a couple of clamps just to hold it against the foam to make sure it's glued pretty well. As you can see there, I was retest fitting, actually playing with that one to see how it all worked and things as well. And doing the same on the opposite side. Having them all into place and then using a couple of clamps just to hold it into position while the glue dries. Once that's done, it's time to get onto the front undercarriage reinforcer as well. Make sure that's nice and stuck. So using the Yoo-hoo pour, sliding it about in the contact surface, meeting it up against the wing, the main part that's already glued in, and then getting the 3mm ply part as well, getting that glued into place, making sure it's nice and flush against the opening as well where the retracts are going to go. Putting the mechanism in place just to again make sure it's nice and square, and we've got enough space that I'm not too tight in any part. And then we do the same with the opposite side as well. On the forward retract support mechanisms here, we're just gluing that into place just now. Again, making sure it's nice and square along all the contact surfaces. We clamp, just keeping it nice and tight. Still plenty of space for the retract mechanism. So we should be looking at, as per the guide, the servo reinforcers and stuff. So here we've got the aileron ones. Aileron ones are fine because these are going to go into a Y connection. Slot that into place, fit pretty well. Wee bit of trimming there, just a touch. These slots in pretty well. Now here is the gear door reinforcers. I've actually swapped the orientation about on one of them. You can see that one's back to front. Again, that way if I can run these in opposite directions through a Y cable, and then it's only the one channel needed on the receiver. And we did the same with the flaps. So there's a flap reinforcer, a wee bit of Yoo-hoo pour along the surface. And then again, I've not actually cut through this one because I changed the orientation of this servo on the flap so that the flaps can work on a Y cable. So next step is wing reinforcers, flat bulkheads, and the wee exhaust. So here's the flat bulkhead here, small amount of glue along the contact surfaces and offer that into place. And then the small parts for the exhaust bulkheads. I actually put these on back to front. That part there should be on the inside. The middle piece is nice and fine on the middle piece itself. And as you can see, that one's quite short. And I'm looking at it thinking, surely that can't be right. Well, yeah, it wasn't right. And it wasn't till I had everything up and in place I thought, no, let's change that bars because it's no right. So the next step is the retract bay and the wing leading strips. So we're going to leave the retract bay just now and move on to the wing leading edge strips. I've got the mirrored pieces cut from the front, the middle and the rear, and then we're just using a small amount of Yoo-hoo pour along one side. Offer them up and smudge it about so you've got a very thin application of glue. Offer them up and it sticks pretty well. And again, when it comes to sanding, it reduces the visible glue lines and stuff, and you don't get as many globs of glue as well if you just use a small amount of Yoo-hoo. Again, once the front and the middle are done, offer them up, smudge it about, and then we'll get the rear part stuck as well. Keep it nice and flush against the table so we've got a flat edge when it comes to putting it up against the wing. I've already got the wingtip edge pieces on. Put that on when we were doing the wing ribs. And a small amount of glue along the contact surface of the wing. Offer up the leading edge. Just to make sure, smudge it about, make sure that there's glue along all the contact surface. And then the same on the opposite side as well. We've not actually trimmed this either at this moment. We'll wait till it comes together. So here we are back to installing the wing onto the fuselage. And as I say, I forgot to wrap some fiberglass cloth around the leading edge. So now that we've got the tray in place, ready to locate the wing, I've got a good amount of Yoo-hoo pour on here because obviously we don't want the wing to detach. So got the glue on and smudging it about with a scrap piece of foam, and then putting the wing into place. Obviously allow that to cure. So what I've done is I've just got a couple of boxes and putting some weights in the bomb bay just to keep it pressed against the wing panel itself. So next step, we're going to move on to the battery bay sides and the wing reinforcer. The wing rib 1. So here's the battery bay sides, slot that into position. Just a small amount of glue on the tabs, locate them in place, and then it all fitted along absolutely fantastic along the wing. No trimming needed whatsoever, which I was surprised with, as I usually need to do. But yeah, that went in pretty well. And then the main wing rib 1. Again, glue on the tabs and all the contact surfaces. When I put it on, I noticed there was another wee part that we needed glue. Now at the front there, I actually put some glue on where the ESC gets mounted. And what I should have done was just leave that until later on. So now that that's in place, getting a chance to move on to the EDF units itself. As I say, I'm running twin 64s here. Now the bulkhead is very thin. As you can see, you've left the tab on the top there, just so that when I slide it into position, and once it's glued, we can trim it away later on in the build itself. So both the front and the rear tabs, bulkheads, making sure it was nice and flush with the front of the EDF itself. Making sure they're all nice and flat and flush. and as level as possible, and do the same on the opposite side. Small amount of Yoo-hoo along the contact surface of the fan unit, and then slide on bulkhead 1. The front bulkhead, sorry. Then again, just the contact surfaces and the slots on the opposite side. Fiddle it about with it and slide into place. And if you can see here on the EDF units itself, it actually sits out about 6mm. Different size EDFs. And then we're on to installing the 3D printed exhausts. Now at this part, I've actually printed lightweight PLA. It turned out absolutely fantastic, just one wall. So what we've got is some 15-minute epoxy here. Just sliding it into the groove that's there for it, the wee flange. Keep it nice and horizontal on the table so it doesn't slide over, and just trying to make sure they're as flat as possible. So at this point I just test fitted it. I made a wee hole at the front to allow the motor wires to come through. And I'm just test fitting it and seeing how it sits in place before I actually get to gluing it. I was quite happy with how it looks. It was no issues whatsoever with it. Bit fiddly at this point though, so now that we've got the motor wires through, on the opposite one I had to cut the hole a wee bit wider and then feed the wires through. Let's say that it's quite a big build for the table, so it was taking a wee bit of fiddling about. So like I did with the other one, small amount of glue on the flange that butts up against the EDF unit. I've actually put a 6mm piece of foam around the rear of the EDF units itself. Obviously they're a bit wider than how the bulkheads are measured out, but just sliding it into position and then moving it up against the unit itself, looking through the front to make sure it's lined up nice level. And I've got a wee bit of hot glue just in the top just to tack it into place so it doesn't move while I'm waiting on the Yoo-hoo to set. Once I was happy at that, I was actually using some intakes just to hold it nice and level. So we've got the bulkheads on, and it's just time to put on the wing bulkhead itself as well. We've already got the flat bulkheads in place. Quite simple. So now that the units are in and set and the glues all went off and they're pretty firm in place, just trimming away the additional tabs on top of the bulkheads itself. And you will see that there we've cut through and it's just to the top of the unit itself. Again, a bit fiddly, working around the table. So the next step is getting all the servos in place and the retracts and stuff. So at this point I'm getting the ESCs, just trimming it to get the cables through, make sure I'm happy with it. Just test the ESCs to make sure your fans are operating in the right direction as well. Once I was happy that we've got power, yep, it's gone in the right direction. The opposite one, I had marked them up for whatever reason with the same colour coded shrink tube as the motors, but for whatever reason one of them was sitting different on the right hand side as we look at it. So we're just trimming away excess foam here, and a wee bit of hot glue and just securing the ESCs into place. So next step's the upper central spar before we move on to getting the carbon spar in place. Again, quite simple. Just run it along where the slot is for the carbon spar itself, the main gear. Mixing up a wee bit of epoxy, and I've cut the two spars, lined them up just to make sure I see where it's gone and it's the right fit. And then along the bulkheads, that's the rear, retract reinforcer, the central bulkhead itself, and any of the wee slots that it goes in. Just putting some 15-minute epoxy and then putting in the carbon spars for additional support there. A wee bit in the middle just to make sure it meets up. And in the wee tabs, the wee slots itself, just sealing it off really. It's probably just no need for it, but I put it on anyway. And just a wee touch at the ends there. Obviously this is going to be a big support to the wing itself. Once we're happy at that, it's went off. I actually remembered to get some fiberglass cloth and just cutting it into small pieces, and then some water-based varnish, just fiberglassing the cloth on. Use the water-based varnish as the glue, and I did give it a couple of coats. There's an extra piece as well, just doubling it up, and do the same on the opposite side, just to make sure there's a good bit of strength there. Once I was happy at that, a wee bit for the central bulkhead itself. I'm just coating it with water-based varnish first, putting the fiberglass cloth on, giving it another coat, letting it soak in, and then on with a second piece. So now that that's in place, we're on to the rear battery compartment support, not the undercarriage at the moment. So now that we've epoxied it in at the back, a wee bit of fiberglass, some glue around the contact surfaces, and then slide in the rear battery compartment support. Allow that to go off, and then we'll do the wing front bulkhead and the forward battery compartment spacers. Now there's two of them, the forward compartment spacers, so bit of glue and smudge it about, and then some on the contact surfaces around, and slide that into place. Let that set. Once that goes off, what I'm doing is at the moment we'll just get the rear retract support pieces, slide them, put them into place while we're at it. Now that the back part's all done with the carbon support spar, happy at that. So we've got the EDF intakes and the front support, just a wee bit of glue, Yoo-hoo pour. I've printed this in PLA plus, just one wall. They look fantastic, and I'm just gluing them up, making sure they're nice and tight and flush against the table. Once that's set, we'll just offer them up against the fuselage for a wee test fit and see how it all looks. And it was all looking pretty good, better than I expected with my cutting skills. So a wee bit of glue on the flange of the intake itself, and then some along the contact surfaces. Just smudge it about on the main bulkhead there, and then slide it up into position, and just by looking through and making sure it's lined up with the EDF unit itself so nothing's twisted. A wee spot of hot glue just to tack it into place, just to stop it moving. This is where we're allowing the Yoo-hoo to cure. And again, just checking, making sure it's nice and flush. We've got a nice flow going into the EDF unit itself. Now the battery hatch itself, moving on to that now, where we're letting the glue go off. Now here I made a wee bit of mistake. I was just looking at it and then starting with the rib 1, 2, 3, 4 through to 6, and obviously just working our way along. A small amount of glue on the tabs and the contact surfaces, and then slide it into the battery hatch base itself. As you can see, we've got the side panels cut out as well, just sitting ready to go. So again, small amount of glue along the contact surfaces, the wee tabs. And then as I go to offer it up, you can see that it's in the wrong orientation. So at this point, just remove the ribs and switch the ribs about so that they were in the right location. And as I turned it round, I thought, have I put it in the wrong way? By this time, well, we're into the build. So on the opposite side, small amount of glue along the contact surfaces and offer it up and allow that to cure. So the next step here, now that the compartment's in, we should be looking at the undercarriage. So with the rear undercarriage, printed it all in PLA plus. I'm sure it was 4 walls and 0% in infill. But just be mindful that it is plastic. A normal Z-bend, because I use Z-bend pliers, the Z-bend was too tight for the swing arm itself. So just make sure that you bend a push rod to have it fit itself. So here we've got the wee 3mm brass inserts, and I'm just heating it up with a wee blowtorch. Probably heat it up a wee bit too much. However, there's plenty of videos out there that will probably show you how to do it better than I did. But just on a wee rod, just heating it up so that it melts the plastic. Offer it up to the holes that are already there. Just slide it into position, and I'm just using the ruler just to make sure it's nice and flat and flush and doesn't go down too far. Now the rod itself, you should be using 2mm threaded bars and nuts and bolts and stuff, but I didn't have any, so what I did was just use 2mm push rods. Plenty of push rods lying about, all different sizes, so just put them through and bent them into place so it was just securing them. Now here I'm just heating up another wee push rod and just pushing through, because I've pushed some plastic, melted plastic through to the back of it. And then I've got the 3mm struts for the wheels. Now the 3mm bar can be a bit of a pain to bend to try and get that, the nice 90-degree angles. So you can see the sizes there. The strut itself, while I'm just putting in some 3mm screws just to hold it in place, the length of the strut itself is 10 centimeters, 100mm, and then it bends out 15mm. The length of the wheel strut that I have is 32mm. I'll put up a wee picture, and along where you slide the wheel in, it's 29mm as the measurements I've got. Probably a bit confusing, but I'll add a wee picture so it's a bit clearer. It will take a bit of fiddling about. Here I'm just measuring up the push rod linkage that I used. Again, it took a bit of fiddling about to get the servo to work 90 degrees and pull the whole mechanism up. So I'll leave a wee measurement there as well. I'm sure it was 30, 35, 36, can't remember. You need to excuse me because I'm actually editing the audio after the build, just to make sure that we've got things right, and made sure everything was working. So on the door flaps itself, these were printed lightweight PLA. Again, just one wall on these, and just a wee 1mm push rod, just pushing that through to just hold it together. These worked absolutely fantastic. But like I say, with the wheel struts itself, it will take a bit of playing about. I'll put up the measurements, but I had to actually cut some holes in the doors itself to allow the colettes that go through. We're not going to move on to the undercarriage mount just yet. We're still playing with the retracts itself. So I've got some grease. I can't remember what type of grease. Just a universal. I'm putting it into the mounts itself. So offering up the undercarriage mechanism to the wing plate itself, and I've got a wide selection of screws here. Now this is certainly a bit fiddly. If your screwdriver's too big, or get a small screwdriver so that you're not actually putting the screws in at angles. However, with a bit of messing about, it did actually get it to work. What you can't see is on the opposite side. It's already installed, it's working, it's fine, because I did a lot of playing about with it to get it right before I actually videoed this part, just to show how it actually gets mounted. So the screws, they're a bit long, but they're in place and they're holding up pretty well. So the wheels itself, again, printed these with the hubs were lightweight PLA and the wheels were in flexible TPU. So here we've got the wings, the undercarriage installed, and I've got the servo arm working on a 90-degree servo just to make sure it all works. Once that's in place, I've got the door, the main gear door. Servos in place for that as well, and just offering up a wee bit of glue, making sure it's nice and flat and flush to the bottom of the wing itself. Testing out the mechanism. As you can see just here, this one's already working, so I'm just measuring out the push rod that I've got wired up to the servo just to make sure that's the right size. Just moving the arms to make sure it kind of works. So here we're just testing the mechanism. I've got a delay on one of the servos. Comes down pretty quick to allow the gear to come up. Once the gear comes up, then the door, the main gear door will return. But I'm not sure if you can see there, well, underneath my hand, where the 3mm rods that hold the wheels meet up. They're actually touching against the main gear door itself. So it will take a bit of fiddling about. So now that we've got the wheels printed, sliding them on to the 3mm wing struts, and then putting the collets on the end just to hold the wheels in place. Testing it out, and yeah, it all worked pretty fantastic. I can't wait to give it a go. The flying field that I fly at, I'm not sure it's going to cope with these, but you know, we'll certainly give it a go anyway. I'll taxi test it and stuff as well. So now that we've got the gear in, like I say, it'll take a bit of fiddling about just to get it right and to make sure that, you know, the mechanism works fine and stuff. We've got the front one, we're putting on the Retract support panel. Now from here on in, there is parts of the video that's missing. While I'm happy playing away building, I'm not realising that the camera's actually stopped or the batteries went flat. So I've just got the servo support piece there as well. I've just CA'd that in place, and I've got some lines drawn along it. I'd measured it out just to make sure that it was all lined straight. So the undercarriage support former at the front, as you can see, yes, this part had the battery had went flat. So we've got the nose retract installed, we've got the servo hooked up, we've got the support panel at the front, and we're just doing the retract side supports here as well. Now I have got a collet on the wheel at the moment, but it's actually a bit too big. I cut a small relief in this side panel as the servo arm was digging into it. And then at the back, putting on the back support piece as well. While all the glue's wet, just making sure everything's nice and square. Once I was happy that it was all in place. Yep, wheels work and stuff, so it was fantastic. Moving on to skinning the fuselage and offering up the wee bulkhead reinforcers. So like I was saying earlier, when we were actually putting the main bulkheads, bulkhead 2 that were gluing there, bulkhead 1, if they're not absolutely straight, you can miss parts of it. So here I've glued around the outsides of the bulkheads to make sure it's covered in UV port, and then I've put a small amount of hot glue on the front just to hold it into place, so that if there is any surplus, and as you can see there was about 10 millimeters or so that I just trimmed off. Most of the other skim parts didn't take much trimming at all. I think what Craig's got is pretty damn fantastic, the measurements that he's put up here. So a wee bit of hot glue just holding it into place, and then on to former number 2. So we're just forming it over the edge of the table, just pulling it across the corner, and then test fitting. Offering it up so that it's in the centre line. And yeah, about this second skin went on pretty quick. So again, around the bulkhead, some yoo-hoo, and then I'm using a thin bead of hot glue just to tack it and hold it in place, so that when I go pulling it around, it doesn't peel off. Obviously allow the hot glue to set before you start pulling it around. And here I was making sure that obviously any of the green Depron markings was on the inside, not the outside. It's the last thing you want. So again, just a tiny couple of mils off there, and it was nice and flush. Just when you're doing each skin, just try and, once the first piece is on and you're on the next part, just try and slide it up towards it to get it as flat and flush as possible. So the next one is the reinforcers. Now on the plans they're marked as B's, and I think it's a C reinforcer, but on the build guide itself it's actually labelled differently. However, the sizes can only go in one place, so it certainly wasn't too much of an issue. Now these ones obviously support, because it's a 6mm skin, or bonding, sorry. These are the wing root reinforcers, I think. I think these were marked E, but like I say, there's only certain shapes and positions, so there was only one place for it to go. So pilots, next part is skins C, D, E, F and G. As you can see, C and D are already done, E and F are already done, and here we are fitting skin G formers. So once again, sorry, but you need to keep your eye on the battery and the camera when we're building. So former G on the bottom has done, and here we've got former G on the top done. Now this bit was a wee bit tricky for skinning it. It did take a wee bit of trimming. However, we'll get to that in just a wee second, but we need to get the intakes on because they look stunning. Again, printed in lightweight PLA, just 2 walls these were. So I've got a wee bit of hot glue just at the root. The surface is covered in yoo-hoo pour, and a wee spot of hot glue just at the bottom end, just so that it can tack into place while the yoo-hoo's going off. As you can see, a good amount of yoo-hoo along it, a wee spot of hot glue in the wing root, and a wee bit at the end. Now what I'm doing here is I'm lining it up with the intakes itself. There should only be a 3mm gap at the top, however I was missing, I had a wee bit extra just because I was lining it up with the intakes. So back to G here. C, D, E and F's done, and here we've got G. So I've got a wee bit of hot glue just at the seam where the wing is. I've got some yoo-hoo pour around the skin itself, and a wee bit of hot glue at the opposite side as well, just to tack them into place so it doesn't pop off. The yoo-hoo are around the formers itself will hold it. So here's G at the top. I've done some shaping, done some trimming just to get it in place, and I've tacked again just a wee bit of hot glue in some contact points just so that it doesn't open up. Now I've got the battery tray there as well, just to keep it in place and stop the wires dangling about and marking the foam. So onto the rest of the skinning, pretty much the same as we've done throughout the fuselage pilots. Just forming it over the edge of the table, lining it up and seeing what actually needs trimmed. Again, this one, pretty much the majority of them were pretty good. Just a wee bit of trimming, and the plan say to cut them oversize. I actually cut them as per the plan and just needed just a slight amount of trimming on it. So once you've got some Yoo-hoo pour around the contact surfaces, again I'm just putting a thin bead of hot glue on it just to line it up, because the tail is double walls. Obviously there's a seam there where you can see where to line it up so it's nice and straight. Wrap it around, and then again just a small bit of Yoo-hoo, hot glue, just to hold it in place. And obviously keep a hold of it until the hot glue sets. Again, next skin, just forming it over the edge of the table. And just a wee bit of trimming, just trying to get it as flush to each other as possible. So going back to the wings, you can see there on the wings with the main gear doors, I've cut some holes to allow the colettes to pop through and let the gear door shut better. The main undercarriage, the 3mm pieces of foam as well, I've just hot glued onto the undercarriage struts and put the 3mm foam skin there as well. So the rest of the skinning is pretty much the same as we've done so far. So now that I've got it turned upside down, I'm using the under cowlings. I'm going to attach them. There's two parts. Obviously I've stuck them together with a wee bit of CA glue. So just using a pen, marking an outline of where the contact surfaces are going to be. Offering up the under cowling, just giving it a wee rub about so I can see where it's made contact and where it's not. Just sticking a wee bit of hot glue up front, again just to tack it into place. Now there was a wee groove there, a wee gap where my hand is, because obviously the intake is sitting about 3mm higher than it should be. So a wee bit of hot glue on, some Yoo-hoo pour along the contact surfaces and stick it down. Carrying on with the skinning, I've already put the wee reinforcer panels along the length of the fuselage, as you can see there, and we're just offering it up like we have done with all the other pieces. I'm using a wee scrap piece of foam there. I think that was a 6mm piece of foam, just to try and make sure it's nice and flush and as flat as possible. Wrap it around. Make sure it's a nice fit. I did trim it slightly. Again, wee bit of hot glue, just to tack it and hold it in place. And again, you know, I'm trying to have it, using this foam to help squeeze it down and make sure it's as flat as possible. And again, sorry that, you know, we may not have the clearest of pictures here, but I'm sure you understand what's going on. It's either that or there's every chance it would have fell off the table. As you can see, just at the left hand side of the screen, the servo wires were just at the edge of the table. I must have bumped the camera here while I was turning it about. Oops. So like we have been doing, just some skin in it, a wee bit of hot glue just to tack it into place. And then offer it round. Then again, just using a wee bit of scrap piece of foam just to try and keep it as nice and flat and flush as possible. And now on to the last piece before the skin cone. Now this was the tightest part. Obviously it's got the tightest curve on it, and there was a wee bit of gap, but I wasn't too bothered because I knew I was going to put a wee bit of filler along the fuselage itself, just to make sure that, you know, it's nice and as clean as possible. Again, once the hot glues went off on one side, just wrap it around and then onto the other side. And while I've tacked it up against the fuselage, I'm trying to push it together to keep all the skins as close to each other as possible. So now that that's done, back to the battery hatch, where we made a wee bit of a mess the last time. The under cowlings and that's done, forward and rear. So yeah, let's get to finishing the battery hatch. So again, we're looking at it and I'm thinking, right, okay, this is how it should go. Let me just form it on the table, get a nice wee curve on it. And then realising that the shallow end, which is the left as we're looking at, is where the squarest part of the hatch, top hatch, should be. So here I'm putting on some Yoo-hoo pour, dreaming away, thinking, yes, I can't wait to have the Valiant built. To look at it and thinking, yes, okay, this is the most that I'm really going to be needing to trim on any of the parts. And as I'm looking, I'm thinking, nope, it's the wrong way. It should be over that side. So using a wee bit of hot glue just at the top, just to make sure we're holding that down and tacking that into place, and then the rest will stick. And then the side panels, I wasn't too sure. I thought, like, don't just stick them in there, Baz. Let's get it lined up on the fuselage and see how it's going to look, because I wasn't sure if they were coming up at an angle or if they were flat like they actually are at the moment here. But then I figured, well, when the wing plates go on, that's really how it should look, is pretty flat. So using a wee bit of Yoo-hoo along the edge of the 3mm foam, which is the easiest part, then a wee bit of hot glue along it, just for quickness. We put the wee side parts on it. When I say just for quickness, I could have used the Yoo-hoo as it is contact glue and gave it sufficient amount of air time to dry. However, sometimes when you think, why is he build so quick, is because half the time I'm not really taking my time. Using a wee bit of hot glue if I can, just to speed up the process. So that's the battery hatch done. Now to the exciting part of skinning the surfaces. So these ones, the main panel, I've got a wee bit of tape along the inside of the battery hatch, because in case you can't guess, I'm going to put just a thin bead of hot glue along the side there. Now just at the top there where my hand is, the point, extend it maybe 3mm to the top and 3mm to the fuselage, but other than that the main shaping's pretty good. So I've got some hot glue, I'm excited about that stuff, some Yoo-hoo pour along the ribs itself, and then a wee bit of hot glue just along the battery hatch and at the bottom of the root. Slide it in, push it up to the battery hatch as nice and tight as possible where the tape is. Obviously stop the glue spilling out. That way I know it's made good contact just there. Wee bit of masking tape just to hold the wing in place against the contact surfaces to make sure it's, it's gluing properly. A couple of wee spots in the exhaust parts as it folds down. Now just at the rear of the panel, the wing panel and the fuselage, you can see a curve. There's a wee bit of curve needing cut out of the top wing panel as well. We spot of hot glue just to tack it at the front, and again some masking tape just to hold it down against the surfaces. Once I was happy with that, there's a small piece, 6mm piece, to go in at the back there just to support the panels, but obviously I cut a small relief to allow the servo wires to go through as well, and we do the same on the other side. If you're wondering what all the numbers are at the servos, it was just so that I could manage it through the radio so that I knew which channel I was reversing, etc. So I managed to squeeze it all into a 10 channel receiver. So now we're just teasing that into place, ready so that when we put on the outer wing surface, there's a wee bit of skin there to meet it up with. So at this join line, obviously some yoo-hoo paw along the contact surfaces. I didn't actually use hot glue at this point, believe it or not. However, where you can see the wheels are, you know, for the undercarriage, once I've got yoo-hoo along all the contact surfaces, I'll give it a wee smoothing out at the leading edge so I can make sure I've got a good connection all the way along. But when this part was done, once it was dried and fixed, as you can see, I'm just attaching some masking tape, low tack, just to hold it all in place. I'm just teasing it together to try and get as nice and smooth a join as possible. Then once the wing surfaces have done, I actually open up the main landing gear and put a small piece of fiberglass cloth on the inside and water-based varnish, just so we seal it on the inside as well. So with the flaps, I'm making up the flaps here. What I'm doing is I'm just doing 2 parts at a time, flap 1 and flap 2, just gluing them together, and then with a sharp knife blade, be very careful. I'm just trimming away as much as possible before we actually get to sanding it, just to save some of the pain of sanding. Yep, so just trim away as much as possible just to try and get a good shape. Tidy up that mess, and then small amount of yoo-hoo across the contact surfaces, offer both of them up together and give it, you know, a good smudge so it's a very, very thin application, and then stick it down. And again, trim away as much of the foam as you dare before we actually get to sticking it down and going on to the next part. So there we are, flap number 1, 2 and 3 is done. Small amount of glue as we do, smudge it about so it's very, very thin, and then offer up to flap 4. Making sure you're working in mirrored parts, so you're not making 2 flaps for the same side. And again, just trim away some of the foam as per the plans, the markings on the plans that they're given. So here I'm just using actually sanding. As you can see, I'm sanding inside and not a lot of dust coming off compared to if we had left it, we didn't trim it up so much as possible. But yeah, getting a nice shape on this before I go into gluing on the next section. A wee damp cloth wipes up all the Depron dust. Make sure you are wearing some sort of breathing apparatus as well, as dust in your lungs ain't very good for you. So again, small amount of gluing, offer it up to part 5, just the slightest amount of trimming needed for part 5. So here, part 6 and 7, as it's the underside, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this, going to join the 2 parts together, but we're not going to fix the flap until I print some TPU flexible hinges. So here I'm moving on to the aileron, and I'm just trimming it again as per the guide, making sure we're working in mirrored parts. There's aileron 1, and again a wee bit of trim there. And then the same on the mirrored side as well. Now, and these wee parts is giving us the 45-degree angle. There I'm just running along just to make sure it's nice and smooth, removing the smallest amount. So we did, like we have done with the flaps, just I'm using a sharp razor blade and trimming off as much as possible, and do the same process for the rest of the flaps. So here I've marked on the flap hinges where I'm going to put the wee flexible hinges. I just got a wee bit of 5-minute epoxy on there just to hold the flexible hinges there in place. And here's the bottom of the flaps that I says we would come back to. So just trimming them up ever so slightly, taking as much off as possible. And as you can see, I'm just seeing that we've got enough off so that it gives it a nice angle when we deploy the flaps, and there's no any tension between bumps of foam and where you want the flap to go. So this is 2 pieces of Depron thick on the bottom. The epoxy set. So here we've got some thin amount Yoo-hoo pour, like we have done, and I've got all my just about empty tubes here. Squeeze them together and obviously smoothing out the glue to as thin as possible. Offering it up to the underside of the flap. And I'm just putting a wee bit of tape on it just to stick them together, just to make sure that, you know, we've got a nice adhesion. Especially where the hinges are. We don't want it popping up. And as you can see, because I'm doing it nice and tight and holding it together, it's actually popping off the back. So small amount of tape and just cover the hinge, the seam itself. And then we'll do the same with the opposite side. Once that's done, you've got the flaps together. We should be installing them before we move on to the ailerons. So along the root, the trailing edge of the wing where the flaps go, I've measured up 12 millimeters from the base, because I'm two thick layers of Depron thick as to where the hinges are. Now I've already cut some slots, and what I'm doing is I've got 15-minute epoxy, and I'm just forcing it in the wee slot so that when I put in the flaps, the epoxy is going to take to the hinges. I'm just using a push rod to push it through, and do the same on both sides. And then I will just get a scrap cloth and just tidy up any spare epoxy that's maybe oozed out or not actually forced right into the holes, the wee slots for the hinges. Offer that up in its position, and what I'm doing, I'm just pushing it against the wing so that it's as tight and flat and flush to the surface as possible, so that when the flaps deploy, the only gap that I'm going to get is at the top. I did ponder and think about how I could get Fowler flaps installed on it, because I thought that would be pretty cool, but yeah, maybe another time. This design is superb, and the way the flap operation works, I'm totally happy with it. So attach, once you've laminated the aileron and shaped it, attach it like we have done with the flaps. So moving on to the horizontal stabilizer and the elevator. I've got a scrap 3mm piece of foam, and I'm just marking along the underside, or sorry, the trailing edge, so I can mark a wee line where I'm going to put the hinges, and the same on the elevator control surface as well. And then with a sharp blade, just cut a small relief 45-degree angle, making sure you leave the center line as well. So it's just a tiny wee bit, doesn't need much at all. And then I've printed off some hinges here as well, 3D printed. I can't remember what one these were off, but you'll find them on the Jetworks site. And what I've done, I've just marked it up as to where it will go on the foam, so that I'm not cutting into the trailing edge balsa. And where it's nice and straight, I'm just using a scrap piece of foam and marking off a hinge line as well, so that it's straight and flush against the vertical stabilizer itself. Just cut out a small relief, remove that, and just test fit. It was actually a wee bit bigger than I wanted, however it's not a lot to worry about. And then I'll get some low tack masking tape on the on the top side of the elevator hinge control surface, mix up a wee bit of epoxy. So the control surface here, we're actually working upside down. Just put a wee bit of epoxy into the slots, place in the control horns. I'm just using a wee battery just to keep it nice and level, so it's at 90 degrees. Once that sets and goes off, on the underside I've just got some filler, lightweight filler, and I'm just scraping it into any gaps that we've got from the installing the carbon fibre rods. So I've printed off some flexible TPU hinges, just I think it was 25 by 15 millimeters, and then cutting some relief slots in the horizontal stabilizer itself, then using a pen just to force just the tiniest wee gaps at the front, so it's just easier to locate the hinges themselves. So it's a wee sort of guide, and then using some Yoo-hoo pour, just putting a good amount on both sides and then sliding it into the control surface itself. As you can see, I've already marked on it a location, and then we do the same with the opposite side as well. Once happy at that, I've got some Yoo-hoo that I'll put again on both sides, and then we'll offer it up and then slide it into position. Actually fits pretty well doing it this way as well. And just make sure when you slide it in, you do give yourself a wee bit of gap to allow movement, so that it's not absolutely flush at each side. And then just install your horizontal stabilizer pilots, fix the control surfaces, and you have a Valiant. So apologies that I've missed parts of the build video, but you know, wing fences, wingtip pieces, and gluing on the canopy and the wee aimer's bulge underneath, I'm sure you'll know how to do that. So I hope this has helped for whoever it is that chooses to go and build the awesome Valiant. And if you have the opportunity to use 3D printed parts, printed in lightweight PLA or PLA TPU for the wheels and stuff, you know, certainly give the guys in the community a shout. Everybody's there to help and advise and stuff. But once it's all done and built, I actually skinned it with some lightweight fiberglass cloth and using some water-based varnish to give it a wee bit extra support on the skin. But here it is, the Valiant. Once she's built, she looks absolutely stunning. Finishes off my V-Class bomber series. Gets the decals done together, and she looks absolutely epic. So I hope this has helped, guys, and none of this can be possible without Craig. Massive shout to Craig for the awesome designs, and stay tuned for the Valiant's maiden. Thanks again, and go fly, son pilots.